Giant monsters summoned from the depths of the unknown. Horrific hell creatures to menace all of mankind. They walk, they kill. From the mad minds that brought you An Occurrence at Howling Crater and Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride, Planet X Games is back, and they're here once again to put the grind back in Grindhouse, this time with their brand new Kickstarter, Escape from Skullcano Island. Escape from Skullcano Island is a brand new high-level adventure module for 5th edition to challenge even the most experienced and stalwart adventurers. Something terrible is happening on this strange prehistoric place, and the fate of all mankind rests on the shoulders of those few daring enough to brave it. Dare you face these gigantic monsters that seek to obliterate mankind and crush the kingdoms of man under their clawed feet. So join us on this titanic thrill ride of kaiju-rific adventure and check out Escape from Skullcano Island by Planet X Games, May 11th on Kickstarter.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. The only crystals he believes in are Kyber, Stu Horvath.
It's a deep cut.
It really was. I was working hard for that joke today. How you doing, Stu?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing great. We are going to cover something pretty cool today, something a little different, something called the Lightsaber Dueling Pack.
I love the fact that the people at home can't see your face because you look very confused that this even exists.
Well, I'm confused on a lot of levels. Like, I know this is another West End Games product.
Yeah.
Yep, it's not the size of the rest of the books.
No.
And that bothers me on a very fundamental level.
So this isn't actually part of the West End Games Star Wars role-playing game.
Oh.
It's just like a different sort of game that you could play. So it's part of a larger, often overlooked, not as successful as I feel it should have been, tradition of solo and two-player games. I feel like solo games just never took off. It's weird. You know, like everybody has a day where they're just like, well, I can't get my group together. I'd like to play.
It's kind of hard to sell, though.
Yeah, I get it, but it's weird, especially considering the success during the period of game books like Choose Your Own Adventure games.
It's different, though, because a Choose Your Own Adventure book, like, I'm going to lay there in my bed, snugly and warm, and I'm going to read this Choose Your Own Adventure book. Or I could read it on the toilet. I could read it, like, in the back of my parents' car as I'm going somewhere. Like a solo adventure, I've often had an issue with them because I'm like, why don't I just watch a movie?
Yeah, I mean, I get you. It's weird that we're wired that way, I think, is the thing that perplexes me. I guess games are just more social than I give them credit for. So this is a two-player game. It's a head-to-head game. Flying Buffalo Games developed a whole bunch of these. Their system is cool because, like, you could buy whatever book you have and I play whatever character that I have and we could fight. And then multiple people could gang up on like a really big monster, like a huge dragon or something. And this is sort of the same thing. Basically, it's a duel between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. There's 2 books and 2 cards. Each card has like your move set. So if I'm playing Luke Skywalker, I have my Luke Skywalker move set in front of me, and I give you the Luke Skywalker book because it shows you in the position of your move. Like if I swing down, you turn to the page that says swinging low, sweet chariot, and you see like an illustration of Luke's, you know, with his sword, with his lightsaber sort of swinging down. And that's the view that I have as Darth Vader, right?
Okay.
Basically, we shout out, you know, what our move is, and we reconcile it through like this weird matrix of like how to reconcile it. That's not important. It's simple though. And you score points, and some moves preclude other moves. So like if I swing down, you might not be able to do a thrusting maneuver next time. And then we just kind of play out. It's a sword fight with books.
Okay.
It's weird, right?
Yeah. And now for those listening at home, the look on my face is now gone from perplexed to like, why wouldn't you just get like some lightsabers or broomsticks and go whack the hell out of each other?
Well, maybe you got a lot of your mom's like collects like Yadro statues or something, and like, you don't want to knock anything over.
Yeah, don't do it in the room with the Fabergé egg, guys. Like, that's kind of weird. I like it. The drawings look great. They look like a coloring book more than anything.
It does.
Yeah, I mean, the artwork's cool. I just don't see like kids like sitting there head to head going, I do this feint, I do that feint. Like they're kind of like shouting out sword moves.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool because no matter how awesome it's going to be in the backyard fighting with your plastic lightsabers, like you're not a Jedi and you're also not a trained swords person. So it's cool to, I think, have the sword fight, the moves, the maneuvers, and the Force abilities. Like you could throw stuff. Luke could appeal to Vader's inner good. And there's a couple different layers instead of just the fight.
So light RP.
Yeah. You have Force points that you have to manage, and you lose the fight if you run out of Force points.
So I'm looking at the art, and in a lot of ways, it looks like I went recently, a few years back, to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. And you can get an interactive wand. And throughout the park, there's little spots you could stand on with like a direction. Like if you wave the wand like this and then wiggle it a certain way, like it'll start raining or a light will go on or like something will explode, right? The way that looks to me is not so much as maybe this is a cool game for me going head to head with my buddy, but this is actually what the Jedi sword movements are. So before you just go into the backyard and end up whacking your friend on the hand with a lightsaber and or a broom, this book might be cool for you to actually learn, well, this is the kind of sword... The sword. You got me doing it. This is the kind of lightsaber maneuver Darth Vader would be doing. Because Darth Vader did have a very specific style of fighting versus, say, even Obi-Wan or Luke Skywalker, which is all we really saw in those first 3 movies.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of looking at the book not so much as maybe this would be fun to play head-to-head with a buddy, but if we actually wanted to go and have a lightsaber, not sword, definitely not sword battle, in the backyard... This actually might be the thing to teach us the moves on how to actually do it.
So, like, this is the source book for your childhood lightsaber combat in the backyard, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm seeing it in a completely different way now because I think that that's a fun way to do it. Because, now, look, we all had lightsabers as kids. And I know, like, sometimes we say we all had. It's a very broad generalization.
Yeah.
That being said, growing up in the 80s, loving Star Wars. Like, Star Wars was everywhere. Every kid at one point or another picked up a stick, a broomstick, a baseball bat, wiffle ball bat, anything that was like long and phallic, took it in their hands and tried to whack their friends with it.
It's true.
Maybe you had an actual lightsaber. I don't know. But this is kind of an interesting way to approach it where, like, you see the different kind of maneuvers. And so, yes, you're going to whack your friend in the fingers, but at least you're doing it properly.
Yeah. So, and getting back to the sword thing, I just want to point out, somebody pointed out on Twitter recently that people are shocked when they told them that Jedi are basically samurai. And that's really stuck in my head because I feel like it's so obvious.
Oh, yeah.
And that's his point, too. Is like, it's obvious. Look at the robes. They're spiritual swordsmen. Like, of course they're just samurai. That's been, like, steeping in my brain for the last couple weeks. That they're swords, not lightsabers. Because they are, really.
Yeah, they really are. They're laser swords.
Yeah. So, you don't want to play?
I mean, of course I'll play.
We should do it on the podcast. We should record a session of it.
We should. And I actually, at age 40, like the idea of doing that better than, say, what I initially said earlier, which is taking it out in the backyard and practicing things, because I don't want my fingers to get whacked.
Yeah. And I just don't want to be seen in public, swinging like, there's cell phones. You can videotape that and put that on YouTube, and it'll be embarrassing.
Yeah, well.
It'll shame my family.
It will shame your family. It'll make me have to go do more cardio.
I do kind of wonder if this would be an interesting way to resolve lightsaber combat within the context of the RPG.
See, that was my next question for you.
I hadn't actually thought about it until just this second, so I don't know the answer, but I think that's an intriguing possibility. I think that this is probably too much because, like, everybody else would just be kind of sitting there, like, watching, which I don't think would be fun for the around the table dynamic, but
I don't know about that.
Might be kind of cool.
It's cool in a way that a Jedi is just overpowered.
Yeah.
A Jedi is just baseline OP. Even a young Jedi, the things that a young Jedi can do versus, say, your bargain basement scoundrel is a lot more. Like, I think the way that this is set up, if done properly, using it to resolve lightsaber combat in the West End game, Star Wars game, it might be actually kind of cool because it might be something very fast-paced to be done with the game master.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so we're going to have a quick lightsaber battle. So this is what's going to go on. We're doing it. It's kind of running concurrently with whatever other combat is happening now.
Yeah.
And it's just once around the table. Boom, 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 boom. Here's your lightsaber moves, because you figure that the lightsaber would be moving at a faster pace in that kind of battle than, say, the rest of the combat going on.
Yeah, right on.
So I think that would actually be a pretty cool way to suss that out.
Yeah, and I think that the system here is super light. I would have to look at the math to kind of like figure it out. Like there's a matrix of math where like you compare numbers and stuff, and it's very intuitive, but like the underlying system feels a lot more complicated. So like it might be difficult to hack it for your different characters. But it would be cool. I think that's worth exploring for sure.
Now, do they make more of those books, or is it just one for Luke and Darth?
For the Lightsaber Dueling Pack, that's all there is. However, and I feel like this has more application for the role-playing game, they made a TIE Fighter versus X-Wing version of this. I don't own that, but I got to track it down because it seems so cool. I just like that idea.
Yes, I've always kind of wondered how that would work when you're dealing with planes and the different kind of, spaceships and the different kind of things that you could do in space and with movement.
Star Wars podcast about swords and planes.
Yeah. There's a reason why we don't make that podcast.
Yeah.
We stick to role-playing games.
I always felt that the space combat was really hard to convey when we were running the game, and it was usually something that wound up being hand-waved. They did have a board game, Star Warriors, maybe it was called, that I thought was supposed to plug in somehow, but I'm not sure that they ever really resolved that in a satisfactory way.
It's difficult because when you think about the concept of the different things that happen in Star Wars, you could have a completely, this is what happens on a battlefield. We're doing the raid on Endor, right? And then you have in the Death Star an actual lightsaber battle, which is a completely different style and kind of combat.
Yeah.
And then outside the Death Star, you have a star battle going on with like all different spaceships going after each other. Like that's kind of hard to reconcile in one actual gaming experience.
Yeah, and I think you can do it with two of those things. I think that the lightsaber combat and the large-scale ground warfare is easy for people to deal with, but like space combat, I think that one of the real appeals of Star Wars in general, one of the things that like made people's heads explode back in 77 was the space combat, because it was so visual and it looked so good
and moved a lot faster than Star Trek.
The idea of like starfighters as opposed to like capital ships, and like I think that is one thing that the theater of the mind kind of fails at. And it'd be interesting to see if the dueling pack for that kind of solves that or makes it a little bit better or easier to handle.
Well, it depends on how good of a mail day you have. We might be able to determine that later on.
I'll get looking.
Stu, do you have any final thoughts on the Lightsaber Dueling Pack?
My final thought is, when are we going to play it and record it?
All right, let's do it.
All right.
Coming soon to the Vintage RPG podcast, Stu and Hambone play lightsabers.
It might just last a couple seconds because we might just think it's too ridiculous.
You never can tell. We do try out some weird stuff on this show.
Yeah, it could be bonus content for the Patreon if it goes poorly.
Well, folks, that's another fun episode of the Vintage RPG podcast. Stu, where can people find you?
Every day at Vintage RPG on Instagram, talking about stuff like lightsaber dueling packs. I bet you never knew that existed. You would have if you followed my feed.
This is very true. You can find me on Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about Dungeons and Dragons. I tweet about professional wrestling. You can follow my day-to-day adventures in podcasting and in life on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire. Folks, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Every little thing that you do helps other listeners to find us, and we really do appreciate that. Don't forget to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. And for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.